Cadet Elias Mercer had never been good with weapons. In the Terran Academy he was known as the Thinker, the one who could solve a planetary puzzle or predict an alien negotiation before anyone else. His body was lean, his reflexes adequate, but nothing extraordinary. Yet here he was standing on the edge of the Luminar expanse, a training world known for its hostile ecosystems and sentient predators, and feeling an adrenaline rush he had never known in simulations. The forest stretched infinitely before him. Towering bioluminescent trees bent and swayed in a wind that seemed aware of him. The ground pulsed faintly, veins of mineral-rich soil faintly lighting up with every step he took. Every creature that called this jungle home was a marvel of survival, and Elias had spent the last 6 hours observing, cataloging, and moving silently, learning the rhythm of life that was not his own. But then the silence came. Not the stillness of a forest settling at dusk, not the pause of prey sensing a predator. It was as if the jungle itself had been paused. The faint hum of insect swarms, the rustle of alien foliage, the distant calls of luminous fauna, all vanished. Elias froze mid-step, the tip of his boot resting over a glowing moss patch that would have left a perfect print. His instincts screamed that this was wrong. He touched the comm unit on his wrist. Protocol forbade communication during solo exercises, and yet something primal whispered that rules were irrelevant now. In the shadows, shapes began to move. Large, sleek, armored forms slid between the trees with uncanny grace. They were not part of the training program's holographic simulations or automated predators. Elias had studied the Terran Academy's intelligence briefings on the Expanse's indigenous military species, the Carracks, but nothing prepared him for seeing them live. 4 of them stalked him, moving like shadows made of liquid obsidian. Their segmented exoskeletons glinted faintly with an unnatural sheen, and faint ripples in the air hinted at active cloaking fields. Apex predators, elite warriors, hunters who had never met failure. Elias's mind raced. Run. Hide. Fight. None of these options were viable. His attackers moved faster than any human could, sensed life through the faintest heat signatures, and wielded technology capable of leveling a building. Yet he didn't panic. The years spent studying alien cognition, xenobiology, and survival strategies converged into a single realization. The only way to survive was to think, not fight. The first strike came without warning. A pulse of subsonic energy washed over him, disrupting his equilibrium. His legs buckled. His hands failed to respond. Gravity became an enemy as he fell face first into the moss, tasting the sharp tang of earth and blood. Consciousness wavered, but his mind clung to observation. The Carracks weren't hunting for sport, they were conducting an experiment. A test. When his vision cleared, he found himself enclosed, not in a physical cage, but in a shimmering energy field that formed a 3-meter cube. Outside, the Carrack stalkers moved with clinical precision, cataloging his every motion. At the forefront was their commander, Varric, nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton scarred from centuries of battle, his small dark eyes exuding contempt and curiosity in equal measure. "You awaken," a guttural voice translated in his comm implant. Cadet Elias Mercer. Analysis: intellect exceptional, physical form average. You are prey in this exercise. Outcome predetermined. But observation will be instructive. Elias nodded slightly, masking his fear. He studied the energy lattice enclosing him. It pulsed at regular intervals, stabilized through precise power cycles. And then an idea sparked. The jungle was alive with minute electrical and chemical fluctuations he had spent hours cataloging. He touched the energy field casually, noting a subtle shimmer when a native insect, the Luminara flickerwing, landed near it. Its blood contained a chemical compound that caused microinterference in energy sensors. Microseconds, that was all he needed. The Carracks allowed a 30-minute head start. The hunt would begin at dusk. Elias dropped his weight, rolled, and sprinted into the jungle, the data slate clutched tightly in his hand. His knowledge of flora, fauna, and terrain gave him an advantage no soldier's training could match. He moved through a grove of shroud bloom plants whose volatile oils distorted thermal imaging. He maneuvered past grazing hexapods, triggering a stampede to mask his trail. Every step was calculated. Every sound, every scent, every movement was deliberate. Behind him, the elite Carracks warriors adapted quickly, but Elias was already 3 steps ahead. He left false trails, altered his footprints, and created phantom signatures using sound manipulation. One rock tossed here, one branch snapped there, enough to make the Carracks question what they were pursuing. They were precise, coordinated, and ruthless, but they had underestimated a human's capacity for improvisation. Hours passed. The forest became a battlefield of shadows and echoes. Elias deployed traps using natural materials, vines stretched across narrow passes, gourds rigged as resonant sound amplifiers. The Carracks, interpreting these signals, responded as if confronted by a massive territorial predator. Minutes stretched into tension-filled hours as Elias exploited their expectations, their reliance on sensory technology, and their confidence in predatory instincts. By midnight, exhaustion weighed heavily on him. Every muscle screamed, his cuts throbbed, and dehydration gnawed at his mind. Yet his resolve remained. The data slate he carried was no longer a mere training tool. It contained evidence of an unauthorized Carrack's installation, a breach that could spark interstellar conflict. Survival alone was no longer enough. He had to ensure the information reached Terran authorities. The forest whispered around him as Elias paused on a ridge overlooking a narrow canyon. The terrain amplified sound, twisted perception, and created natural distortions in the air, perfect for acoustic misdirection. He began to prepare his masterpiece, traps and diversions that leveraged the canyon's properties, sounds that bounced in impossible directions, echoes that suggested phantom movement. The hunter would become the hunted. The Carrack's commander, Varric, would soon learn the cost of underestimating a human mind. Elias Mercer was 19, unarmed, outmatched physically, but armed with intellect, observation, and adaptability. In the jungle of luminar expanse, he became something more. The unpredictable factor, the anomaly that defied protocol, the human who could break the rules of war itself. And as dusk bled into night, he waited, poised on the edge of a cliff, ready to turn the tables. The hunt had begun. The first strike came as predicted, not from the Carracks themselves but from the jungle. Elias crouched behind a bent shroud bloom tree, the sharp scent of its volatile oils masking his presence. The canyon below amplified the faintest vibrations, turning even the lightest footstep into a roaring echo. He held the data slate tightly, its surface glowing faintly under his bioluminescent wristband. One false move and the Carracks would pinpoint him. He listened. A branch snapped. Too precise. Too deliberate. Varric's voice echoed faintly through the comm translator. You move intelligently, but patterns remain. Observation continues. Elias smirked. Patterns? Humans were meant to break patterns. He adjusted his breathing, synchronized it with the ambient noise, and slowly began to manipulate the environment around him. Tiny stones placed along ledges fell at intervals, creating auditory mirages. Leaves shifted in calculated patterns to simulate movement. Even the air itself, heavy with phosphorescent spores, was stirred subtly to distort infrared detection. He could see them now, the Carracks creeping into the canyon. Their cloaking shimmered like water under moonlight, their segmented legs moving with near-silent precision. Each one calculated, adapted, relentless. But the canyon betrayed them. Every step forward produced cascading echoes that Elias had studied for hours. They were unwittingly entering his trap. A sudden flash, he hurled a gourd filled with compressed luminar gas into the canyon. The explosion was quiet but effective. The spores ignited, swirling in chaotic clouds. The Carracks flinched, sensors overloaded, their advanced targeting arrays momentarily confused. Elias ran. Not directly but laterally. He knew the canyon like the back of his hand now. Hidden depressions, small ledges, natural tunnels. Every feature became part of a human strategy no alien could anticipate. The Carracks were trained for war, but they were not trained for improvisation, for abstract reasoning, for risk that violated all tactical logic. The first encounter came unexpectedly. A warrior lunged from a side path, claws extended, energy emitter ready. Elias ducked, rolled, and slammed a weighted branch into the canyon wall. The echo magnified the impact tenfold. The Carracks misinterpreted the sound as a charge from a larger predator. Its lunge stopped, hesitation flickering in its movements. That hesitation was all Elias needed. He triggered another sequence. A fallen shroud bloom released a small cloud of volatile pollen, which reacted chemically with the natural oils of the canyon floor. The resulting microflash blinded the Carracks momentarily. Using the shadows, Elias vanished into a crevice barely wide enough for him. Varric's voice returned, calm but tinged with frustration. Human, unpredictable. Adaptation, exhilarating. Elias knew he had to push further. Survival alone wasn't enough. He needed data and evidence of the Carracks' covert operations. He scanned the area from his hidden vantage, spotting a small Carracks drone buried partially under luminescent moss. a reconnaissance device designed to transmit live battlefield intelligence back to the command hive. If he could disable it, the human advantage wouldn't just be survival, it would be control. Elias crawled silently to the device. Every step had to consider weight distribution, vibration frequencies, and thermal output. When he reached it, he applied a tiny chemical compound extracted from flickerwing insect blood. The device sparked, emitted a distorted signal, then went silent. Back in the canyon, the Carracks faltered. Their tactical network depended on constant feedback. Without it, coordination faltered, hesitation spread, and human unpredictability became a tangible threat. Elias smiled. They had trained for perfection. They hadn't trained for him. Hours blurred. The night deepened. He navigated natural bridges, avoided bioluminescent predators, and even used the canyon's mineral veins to reflect sensor scans away from his location. The Carracks were relentless, but he was everywhere and nowhere at once. He was the observer and the architect of chaos. At one point, Varric attempted a direct confrontation, emerging from the shadows, his colossal form blocking the canyon exit. Elias froze. Every human instinct screamed flight. Yet he remembered every lesson from survival simulations, every strategy he had analyzed in alien warfare manuals. He spoke, not to provoke, not to threaten, but to redirect. Your protocols blind you. Observation is intelligence, not victory. You see a threat but not the environment. You see patterns but not innovation. Varric paused. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, confusion, perhaps respect. Elias used the moment. He triggered a sequence of reflected light and sound waves along the canyon walls. Shadows multiplied, sounds bounced unpredictably, and Varric's sensors overwhelmed him. The largest Carracks in the hunt, master of stealth and attack, was disoriented by a human understanding of the terrain, physics, and environmental manipulation. It wasn't brute force that saved him, it was thought. Human thought, untethered, flexible, and imaginative. By dawn, the Carracks had retreated to the upper canyon walls, regrouping and recalculating. Elias was exhausted, every muscle trembling yet triumphant. He had survived the first phase. More than that, he had forced the aliens to recognize a factor they had ignored for centuries. Humans were not predictable, and the human mind could turn the battlefield itself into a weapon. He found a vantage point overlooking a hidden valley where the Carracks had established a temporary observation post. Using the remaining time before extraction, Elias sketched out the terrain, noted energy nodes, and identified weak points. This was no longer just training, it was reconnaissance. The data he carried could inform Terran command of alien strategies, vulnerabilities, and the limitations of their understanding. And as the sun rose over the luminar expanse, Elias realized something extraordinary. He had not just survived. He had won on an intellectual battlefield the Carracks didn't even know existed. Humanity, the galaxy's underdog, had been underestimated again. And that underestimation, as always, would become its greatest advantage. Elias checked his comm device. The extraction drone would arrive in 30 minutes. He allowed himself a brief moment to rest. Every wound, every scrape, every bruise was a testament not to physical might, but to resilience, ingenuity, and the power of human observation. From his perch, he could see the Carracks beginning to emerge from their energy cocoon, preparing for a counterstrike. Yet he felt no fear. He had learned their tactics, turned their environment against them, and remained unpredictable. They would not anticipate what came next, because humans, unlike even the most advanced predators, could not be reduced to algorithms or templates. Elias Mercer, one unarmed human against an elite alien species, had rewritten the rules of engagement. And the galaxy was about to witness the consequences. The sun had barely crested the jagged luminar peaks when Elias Mercer began to move. The extraction drone would not arrive for another hour, but time was both his enemy and his ally. Every moment he spent watching the Carracks adjust their formations added to the human advantage. From his perch, he observed the aliens' discipline. Lines of metallic blue and silver, their segmented legs moving with precise coordination, energy emitters scanning the canyon in overlapping arcs. Yet there was a subtle flaw: rigidity. They had adapted to humans as threats, but they had not anticipated humans turning the very terrain into a weapon. Elias's mind worked in rapid sequences. First, he needed to consolidate his knowledge of their sensors and behavior. Second, he needed to create a scenario where the Carracks would act predictably, but in a way that benefited him. Third, he had to survive long enough to execute it. He descended carefully into the canyon, keeping to the shadows, every movement calculated to minimize vibration. He recalled a lecture from the Terran Military Academy, a simulation designed to teach humans how to manipulate predator behavior. The predator hunts what it expects. Change the expected and you change the hunt. That was exactly what he intended. Below, the Carracks had begun to deploy miniature drones, scanning every crevice. Elias ducked behind a rock formation and watched as the drones swept past. Then he did something unexpected. He triggered a small explosive device hidden in the moss. The blast was tiny, almost theatrical, but enough to create the illusion of a human escape route leading into a narrower canyon passage. The Carracks reacted immediately. Every drone, every warrior converged on the passage following the bait. Elias smiled. They were playing into his hands. He sprinted along a hidden lateral path, a route he had discovered during his initial reconnaissance. The path led to an ancient rock formation known as the Hollow Spire, a natural amphitheater that could amplify sound, redirect light, and conceal movement. Here, Elias would make his stand, not with brute force but with the environment itself. As he reached the Hollow Spire, he activated the sequence of traps he had prepared. Reflective panels, thin mineral sheets positioned to redirect the sun's rays directly into the Carrack's drone sensors. Auditory decoys, hollow rocks rigged to emit low-frequency vibrations, simulating the approach of multiple humans. Chemical puffs, compressed gases extracted from local flora, designed to interfere with alien bioscanners. Every trap was a lesson in human problem-solving. Innovation derived from observation, experimentation, and adaptation. The first Carracks entered the Hollow Spire. Its sensors immediately overloaded as sunlight reflected in erratic bursts. It stumbled, emitting warning signals, but it was too late. The auditory decoys activated, creating the illusion of dozens of humans moving in coordinated formations. Chemical puffs filled the air, triggering confusion in their olfactory and thermal tracking systems. Elias moved like a ghost, unseen and unheard, placing microcharges along narrow passages. Every step forced the Carracks to make decisions based on incomplete information. Decisions that humans could predict and manipulate. Varick's voice cut through the chaos, amplified through the canyon walls. Human, anomalous. Your logic, inconsistent. You exploit variables we have not accounted for. Elias chuckled quietly. That's the point. By mid-morning, the Hollow Spire was a labyrinth of disoriented Carracks. Their once unified formation had fractured. Drones collided with walls, emitters misfired, and warriors began overcompensating for perceived threats. Elias had not fought them directly, he had fought their expectations. The first direct confrontation occurred when a Carrack's warrior stumbled into his trap corridor. Elias let it approach, timing each movement carefully. As it passed, he triggered a sequence of reflective lights combined with a localized sound pulse. The warrior's visual and auditory cortex was overloaded. It collapsed, convulsing, unable to discern friend from foe. Elias didn't intervene physically, his strategy had done it for him. From the ridge above, he observed the patterns emerging. The Carracks were attempting to adapt, but every adaptation was based on incomplete understanding of human ingenuity. Their hive logic was linear, humans were nonlinear. Their protocols relied on probability, humans relied on creativity. Elias activated the final phase of his plan, the echo maze. Using the canyon walls, he projected complex sound reflections to create phantom movements and false spatial cues. The Carracks, attempting to predict his location, fell into traps of their own making. Each wrong turn brought them closer to areas prepped with his chemical and reflective defenses. Hours passed in a tense blur. Elias moved with precision, never staying in one place longer than necessary. He mapped every shift in the Carrack's formation, noting weaknesses and anticipating reactions. The aliens were formidable, but they had never trained for a predator who could predict, adapt, and innovate in real time. By late afternoon, the Hollow Spire was effectively under human control. The Carracks had not been defeated, they were still alive, but they had been forced into a reactive stance. They were no longer hunters, they were prey. Elias allowed himself a brief rest, leaning against a rock, muscles trembling with exertion. He reviewed the data he had collected, energy signatures, movement algorithms, response times, and communication delays. Every piece of information would be invaluable for the Terran forces. Humanity had not merely survived the Carrack's test, they had rewritten the rules of engagement. Varick's voice returned, distorted and strained. You are unlike any specimen studied for millennia. Your survival is impossible, yet achieved. Elias smiled. Survival was just the beginning. He had proven a point: human ingenuity could outmatch even the most advanced alien strategies. And the lesson was simple: predictability was the enemy of victory, while adaptability was its champion. As the sun dipped below the canyon rim, Elias prepared for extraction. His traps remained active, ready to confound any late pursuers. The Carracks had learned a vital lesson: humans were not to be underestimated. Their strength did not lie in armor or weaponry alone, but in imagination, adaptability, and the ability to see possibilities where the universe assumed none existed. Elias Mercer, one unarmed human against a species that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, had turned a hunt into a tactical revolution. And the galaxy was about to learn that the most dangerous weapon humanity possessed was not its fleets, not its technology, but its mind. By the time night fell over the jagged luminar peaks, Elias Mercer had transformed from a hunted fugitive into a predator of opportunity. The hollow spire was no longer just a defensive stronghold. It was the keystone of a plan that would force the Carracks to question every assumption they held about human capability. From his concealed vantage, Elias observed their attempts to regroup. Drones flickered uncertainly through the dark canyon, scanning with limited efficiency. Warriors moved cautiously, their hive logic strained as they tried to process conflicting signals. He had taught them fear, not through brute strength but through unpredictability. Elias allowed himself a small smile. Fear is the universal lever. Pull it at the right moment and even the most disciplined opponent bends. He began preparing the next phase of his counteroffensive, the ambush network. Using the natural terrain, he rigged narrow choke points with hidden mines, energy reflectors, and sensory distortions. Every path the Carracks might take was analyzed and manipulated. By the time they realized the danger, it would be too late. At midnight, the first group of Carrack scouts attempted a cautious approach. They moved in silent formations, testing the boundaries of the traps Elias had set. A single misstep triggered one of his reflective devices, blinding 2 scouts. Another triggered a sonic pulse that disoriented a third, causing it to collide with the canyon wall. The Carracks communicated in bursts of clicks and hums, signals that Elias had partially deciphered. He knew that their frustration and confusion were growing. What they perceived as random chaos was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated human strategy. By pre-dawn, Elias had lured the main Carrack's hunting unit into the narrowest part of the canyon, a series of twisting gorges he had mapped with painstaking precision. Here he would unleash the echo array, a combination of sound, light, and chemical signals that would simulate the presence of hundreds of humans. The effect was immediate and devastating. Carrack's drones collided with each other, emitters overloaded, and the warriors began responding to phantom threats. In less than an hour, Elias had forced them into a defensive posture he could exploit. Now it was time for the final escalation, controlled engagement. Elias did not aim to kill indiscriminately, that would be wasteful. He aimed to teach, to demonstrate, to leave an indelible impression of human ingenuity. He emerged briefly from concealment, making himself visible just enough to draw attention. One Carrack's warrior took the bait, advancing cautiously. Elias manipulated its movement with a series of carefully timed light pulses and sound distortions. The warrior stumbled into a trap corridor, narrowly avoiding mines that could have destroyed it. Instead, it was immobilized in a containment net he had engineered from tensile fibers scavenged during prior excursions. The Carracks observed, analyzing every movement, struggling to reconcile this with their understanding of humans. Why would a human avoid killing when it could? Varick's voice echoed again, tinged with confusion. Human, logic, inconsistent, anomalous, unpredictable. Elias considered the words. They were almost a compliment. The Carracks had never faced a species that used ingenuity instead of sheer aggression. Humanity's approach was alien to them. That difference was the key to survival and dominance. Over the next several hours, Elias conducted a series of engagements, each more intricate than the last. He guided groups of Carracks into pre-prepared zones, neutralizing them without lethal force while extracting valuable data. Their energy patterns, coordination algorithms, and response sequences were cataloged in real time. Every encounter enhanced his understanding and strengthened humanity's leverage. By midday, Elias had accomplished something extraordinary. He had turned the hunters into participants in his experiment. The Carracks were being taught lessons in unpredictability and consequence, lessons they could not unlearn. Each tactical decision, each misstep, reinforced the notion that humans were not bound by the same limitations as other species. But Elias knew the ultimate victory would not come from the hollow spire alone. He needed a force multiplier, a method to extend his influence beyond the canyon. Using communication jammers, holographic projections, and synchronized sound pulses, he created the illusion of a larger human force operating simultaneously across multiple regions. The Carracks, interpreting these signals as evidence of overwhelming numbers, began to hesitate, doubt, and hesitate again. This psychological warfare achieved more than physical domination ever could. Fear spread among the ranks and uncertainty replaced their rigid discipline. The Carracks were no longer merely assessing humans, they were reacting emotionally, a condition Elias had predicted but could never have measured with certainty before. As dusk approached, he initiated the final phase, the extraction gambit. Using his accumulated data, Elias plotted a route that would maximize alien losses if pursued, while minimizing risk to himself. Explosions, reflective disorientations, and chemical clouds were triggered in sequence, creating a cascading effect that left the Carracks formations fractured and vulnerable. He moved swiftly, efficiently, with the confidence of someone who had mastered the environment and the enemy alike. Every step reinforced the central truth of human superiority: creativity and adaptability could overcome even overwhelming odds. By nightfall, the Carracks had withdrawn, leaving behind the wounded and disoriented. Elias Mercer, a single human operative, had not only survived but fundamentally altered the battlefield. The galaxy would remember this engagement, not for its casualties but for the revelation it embodied. Humans were not to be underestimated. As he watched the Carracks retreat into the darkness, Elias transmitted his findings to Terran Command. Every sequence of movement, every flaw in their logic, every exploited assumption was detailed for replication on a larger scale. Humanity had demonstrated a principle the Carracks could not ignore. Adaptability, intellect, and ingenuity were the ultimate weapons. Varick's voice, now fragmented and strained, transmitted one final message across the canyon. Human anomaly cannot be contained, must study further. Elias smiled. They would study humans, yes, but the lesson they would learn first was in fear and respect. And that was a lesson worth every risk. As he settled into the canyon for the night, preparing for extraction at first light, Elias reflected on the events of the past 2 days. Humanity had been tested, hunted, and underestimated. And humanity had emerged not just intact, but victorious in a way that no alien strategy could predict. The tide had turned. The morning sun rose over the jagged peaks of the Luminar Canyon, casting long shadows across the hollow spire. Elias Mercer had already begun preparations for his final operation, to turn the tactical advantage he had carved over the Carracks into a galaxy-wide demonstration of human ingenuity. This was not just survival, it was the moment humanity would announce itself as a force the universe could not ignore. Terran Command had mobilized rapidly based on Elias's transmissions. Using the detailed analysis he had collected on Carrack's behavior, fleets were repositioned, weapons recalibrated, and fleets of autonomous drones programmed for maximum disruption. What had started as a solitary mission had evolved into a coordinated counteroffensive that could ripple across multiple star systems. Elias studied the canyon floor, noting the signs of Carrack's movement and hesitation. Every misstep, every pause, every reaction had been catalogued. The hollow spire had become more than a fortress. It was a laboratory and the Carracks, unwitting subjects. By midday, the first of the Carracks reinforcements arrived, unaware of the traps that awaited them. Elias activated the Phantom Network, a complex system of holographic duplicates, sound pulses, and strategically timed explosions. The reinforcements found themselves facing entire battalions of humans that did not exist. Panic spread through the Carracks' ranks, their hive mind attempting to reconcile the impossible. But Elias had one final instrument to play: the signal cascade, a series of synchronized transmissions designed to manipulate Carrack's perception at the neurological level. Every warrior that received the signal began experiencing illusions of human commanders, decoys, and phantom forces, causing disarray that no brute strength could have achieved. Across the canyon, the Carracks faltered. Fleet commanders tried to rally their troops, but confusion and fear had become contagions. They realized too late that human ingenuity was a weapon far more dangerous than raw firepower. Every calculation they had made based on prior encounters now seemed hopelessly incomplete. Terran drones, guided by Elias's data, struck with precision. Mines detonated in sequence, energy barriers collapsed strategically, and Carrack's formations were routed without a single human life lost in direct combat. The hollow spire itself seemed to pulse with a silent, calculated intelligence, a testament to Elias's planning and foresight. By evening, the Carracks were in full retreat. Varick's fragmented messages came through the communication networks, tinged with disbelief. Humans cannot, anticipated, logic, exceeds, prediction, must, adapt. Elias allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. They had underestimated humans as so many had before, and the consequences had been catastrophic for the Carracks. But this was only the beginning. Humanity's revelation was not merely about defeating an enemy, it was about redefining what the galaxy believed possible. Across the Terran fleet, celebrations were subdued but meaningful. Scientists, soldiers, and strategists understood that the Hollow Spire campaign was proof of a principle. Ingenuity and adaptability outweighed numbers and aggression. The galaxy had been watching and the message had been sent. Elias received a secure transmission from Terran Command. Field results confirm superiority in adaptive engagement. Recommend escalation to broader galactic theater. Human methodology validated. The report made Elias smile. Humans had not only survived, they had rewritten the rules of engagement. Every species, every council, every military strategist would now have to account for the unpredictable, relentless creativity of humanity. That night, Elias looked out from the canyon rim at the stars stretching across the sky. He understood with clarity what this campaign had achieved. Humans were no longer simply a species to be measured or managed, they were a variable that defied expectation, a force that demanded respect. But Elias also knew the responsibility that came with this power. Humanity's potential was staggering, but unchecked arrogance could be just as dangerous as external threats. The lesson of Hollow Spire was clear. Intelligence, ingenuity, and strategy were humanity's weapons, and wisdom was required to wield them effectively. In the following weeks, the galaxy witnessed a ripple effect. Carrack's fleets retreated to recalibrate, alien councils debated the implications, and Terran Command began implementing broader strategies informed by Elias's engagements. Humanity was no longer the hunted, it was the standard against which all others would measure themselves. As the Hollow Spire campaign became legend, Elias Mercer returned to Earth briefly, receiving accolades that felt almost surreal. Yet he remained focused on the future. Humanity had won, yes, but the universe was vast, full of mysteries, challenges, and adversaries yet to be encountered. Victory was only a beginning, not an end. In the corridors of interstellar diplomacy and strategy, a single truth resonated. The humans had changed the game. Where others relied on fleets, firepower, and numbers, humanity relied on something more potent: creativity, unpredictability, and adaptability. And as the stars gleamed overhead, Elias knew that the next time the galaxy underestimated humanity, the consequences would be even more profound. Every species would remember Hollow Spire not just as a battle, but as the day the galaxy learned that humans were an anomaly, an unstoppable variable. Humanity had ascended, not through domination, but through the relentless, elegant application of intellect. The Carracks had learned a lesson that would echo for generations. Underestimate humans at your peril, for they were capable of thinking in ways no alien mind could fully comprehend. Elias's final transmission to Terran Command summed it up perfectly. Operation Hollow Spire, humanity tested, humanity proven. The galaxy will adapt. We adapt faster. And so, as night turned to dawn, humanity stood tall, not just as survivors, but as the embodiment of the principle that would define the future. Creativity, ingenuity, and intelligence are the ultimate weapons. The Hollow Spire campaign had ended, but humanity's story was only beginning.